Good afternoon. Welcome to the final session of Festival Saturday. Thank you so much for being here and manning the heat. I know it's hot in here, so thank you. My name is Tim Ehrenberg, and I'd like to take every opportunity I can to thank our top donors, Richie Battle, Randy and Lisa Cohn, Ellen and Linwood Dame, Elizabeth Galvin, Mary and Robert Haft, Adam and Ramona Nee, Nancy Seaman and Alan Schwartz, Beth Wilkinson and David Gregory, and our top sponsors, the White Elephant and the Boston Globe. A round of applause. Please take a minute to silence your cell phones, and Tayari will be signing books on kin and American marriage, and I think we have a few other titles out there outside right after the talk. I had the pleasure of sitting next to Tayari at dinner last night, and when I tell you, this woman is such a born storyteller. Our conversation, she told me so many stories. It wasn't just talking. Everything was perfect. And if you were there last night at our celebration evening, you can see that she's just one of the most charming humans on stage. Tayari Jones is the author of 5 novels, including An American Marriage, which was an Oprah's Book Club selection, and also appeared on Barack Obama's summer's reading list and his year-end roundup. It won the Women's Prize for Fiction, the Aspen Words Literary Prize, an NAACP Image Award, and has been published in 24 countries. Jones is the C.H. Candler Professor of English and Creative Writing at Emory University and lives in Atlanta. Her latest novel, Kin, published in February of this year, was also an Oprah's Book Club selection and a New York Times bestseller. Tayari was honored as one of the Times 100 list of influential people in 2026, and Kin was just chosen as first book of the year so far. Please join me in welcoming Tayari Jones. Hello, my friend.
Hi.
How was your day?
My itinerary sent me to the wrong place. Oh. But
Who do I gotta fire?
I mean, it was still on the island, though.
Good. If you would have called me and said, I'm back in Boston, I said, I don't think we'd get you back. What a year you've had. Are you tired?
I'm a lot of things. I feel really engaged, actually, more so than tired. You know, when I set off on the book tour and they said, you know, can you do 35 cities domestically? And then I had to go to Sydney, I had to go to Auckland, I had to go to the UK. I just decided that I was going to be fully engaged in every place. And I think that is really the key to staying sane on a book tour, is to look at it as the gift it is to meet and engage with so many writers and see so many different parts of the country and the world.
Well, thank you, and thank you for being here. I want to start at the very beginning. What do you first remember writing down on a piece of paper?
Oh, when I was a little kid, I thought I was writing books. I would write little books on pieces of paper and staple them. And I thought I had a body of work. And I had written a book about me and my brother riding on a spaceship. I thought it was cute.
I want to read that.
You know what? I wish that I had it. My mother is not a sentimental person. So there is precious little evidence that I was ever a child.
Okay, so that's like the first seed, but what about your origin story and how did you become a published writer then?
I will say this, when I was a teenager, I liked to read, I liked to write, right? You know, you can imagine that. But I did not know that I could be a writer because, I mean, I grew up in the 70s and 80s, and when I was a girl, if you like to read and you like to write, people didn't think it meant that you were an intellectual or an artist. They thought it meant you were a nice girl because, you know, to the best of my knowledge, I could be wrong, but to the best of my knowledge, you know, nobody has ever gotten pregnant in a library. I'm always afraid that someone's gonna be like, well, actually, you know, in Peoria. So I will say seldom. And so that was just the way that people thought about girls. Like, you know, were you a problem for your parents or were you not? But it wasn't until I went to college, I went to Spelman College, which is a historically black college for women in Atlanta. And when I was in college, I met a writer, and she was my teacher. And she asked me, she said, kiddo, what are you thinking about? And I got ready to tell her, and she said, no, don't tell me, write it down. And so in that, she became my first audience. And by taking me seriously, she modeled that I should take myself seriously. So I really look at that as the first step on my journey to understanding that writing was going to be what I do with my life.
So your first novel is called Leaving Atlanta, and you are from Atlanta, like your bio said. I find it fascinating where people are from and how it kind of determines our personalities, sometimes our beliefs. What is the most Atlanta thing about you, and why does it always appear, I mean, not why, but how does it always appear in your work?
You know, I think the most Atlanta thing about me is that I grew up black, bougie, and segregated. And that's a very Atlanta experience. So I grew up around all black people. My teachers were black, my doctor was black, my dentist was black. One of the things I think about is how much I understood the whole world to be black is that when I was a little girl, I thought Jimmy Carter was black. I don't know why I thought this, but I did. And this lady came to our school and she asked all the little children, you know, I was 6, you know, little girl, you know, who are you gonna vote for? One, I thought I could vote. And I told her that I was gonna vote for Jimmy Carter. And she said, well, why? I said, because he's a black man. And she looked puzzled and I said, oh, he's just light-skinned. And I think that shows that in the Atlanta I grew up in, I had no sense that there was any limitation of what was available to black people. This was the year 1976, and I thought an extremely light-skinned black man was finna be president.
Would have been nice. An American Marriage came out in 2018, and I just loved it. I remember reading that. Who remembers reading that book when it came out? Oh my gosh, such a beautiful novel. Do you think about that book? Do you think about those characters? Because I still find myself thinking and being like, what are they up to right now?
For me, that's how I know I'm done with when I'm no longer thinking about the characters anymore. People sometimes say, oh, well, there'll be a sequel to this book or that book, but for me, I know there won't be a sequel because I'm not worried about them anymore. If I were to write a sequel of An American Marriage or even a sequel to Kin, the characters would have to have a level of challenges, problems, a book worth of problems. And I feel that, you know, if you ever read my books, you know, I put the people through a lot. So I don't think they need a whole nother book worth of problems. I think they've suffered enough, and I've set them on the path to whatever the next phase in their life will be, and it won't be book worthy.
So talk about the years between American Marriage coming out and now we're in 2026 and we have Kin. What were you doing?
I was doing a lot of things. I was traveling, but mostly I was trying to write a book that wasn't happening. I had a contract to write a modern book about Atlanta, and I was excited about it. I think it was a really good idea. It was really about someone who returns to their hometown, and the question really is, you know, can you gentrify your own hometown? I thought this was a good idea. I was gonna base it on I live in a really wacky neighborhood, and I was gonna base it on my insane neighbors. And I had it sketched out. I pitched it to my publisher. I had a contract, but it was like, it wasn't happening. It was like I was going on a blind date with a really good idea. It was a tall idea, a handsome idea. It had a wonderful job. My mother loved it. But you know, we had no chemistry. And I tried and tried and tried, and I had to really figure out why can't I write this book, and I think it was for 3 reasons. I think 1, the fact of a contract kind of made me feel like my creativity had been bought and paid for, and the muse refused to show up. And another reason is that I think I felt a little bit of almost survivor's guilt after having had a successful book. Because every writer knows another writer that's better than you that hasn't had that kind of success. Someone who's been working longer, you know, and they haven't had that kind of success. So who am I to sit up here and try to do it again? It felt selfish. And I remember I said to my mother, I said, you know, I feel like I've already had more than my share. And it occurred to me that if I said I've had more than my share, then was I saying I don't deserve what I've worked for? I never would have thought I was a person that felt undeserving or unworthy. And so every year, on the first of the year, instead of a resolution, I have a word that I meditate on to go through the year. And so I made my word of the year worthy. And I thought a lot about what it means to be worthy. And to my surprise, during the year of worthy, I wrote nothing. I felt like I did not have to. I felt like I'm worthy. I'm worthy. I was just like this on the couch. I was feeling the self-love. And so then the following year, I made my word of the year discipline. Yeah.
Let's keep the applause going for Kin. I thought it is one of my favorite novels of this year. It is such a beautiful book. You just nailed it. When we were in Aspen, we were talking about point of view and your choices for point of view in American Marriage. And I want to talk about point of view here in Kin, because we have two first-person narratives between our main characters, Vernice and Annie. Did you know right away you were going to do that? And talk about how you write first person. Do you become Vernice and Annie, or are you writing down their story?
Well, one, I really enjoy writing first person. There's something to me that's really audacious about me being myself in writing the word I for a character. And I wouldn't say I become them, but I will say this. Before I wrote Kin, I was never one of those people. You know those people that say, oh, I'm just a vessel. You know, the novel came to me, I dreamed of my grandmother, and I am so not that person. As a matter of fact, I was always very skeptical of those people. I always thought they were just trying to seem more interesting. However, after I had that book that didn't happen, I really wrote this book in a different place. I just went back to paper and pencil like when I was a child, and I just wrote on the page just to see what was on my mind, and I did feel like I met my characters instead of creating my characters. And that was very humbling to me because, you know, before this, I always asked myself, you know, what is the story I want to tell? But this time, I had to get very quiet and say, what is the story trying to tell me? And I had to be led by it. And I had to allow myself to be led by it. And so first person is the way this happened. But I hope this is not, I don't want this to be my process in the future. It was very unsettling. It is not that I became the characters, but I didn't know what they were doing or why. I didn't know the point. And so I just had to listen to their voices and write it down.
Let's play a game. It's called Vernice or Annie. You ready?
Maybe.
Who did you hear first?
Vernice.
Who did you see first?
Annie.
Which one would you take to dinner?
They're together.
Aww. Who would you tell a secret to?
I have to tell Annie because Vernice is married and she tells that man everything.
Who'd you go on a road trip with?
I would go on a road trip with Baby Doll.
Who would you join a book club with?
I would join a book club with Lulabelle.
And what would you read?
The Bible. That's what Lulabelle reads.
Would you be willing to read a bit from the book?
Okay. I'm going to read from Vernice's point of view. Vernice, imagine Vernice. She's a country girl, and she goes to college, and for the first time, she's encountering people with a little bit of money. And one day, when she's at a chapel that looks very much like this chapel, an older graduate taps her on the shoulder because this woman has scoped her out as a potential daughter-in-law and has invited her to tea. And that family is known as the McHenry family. Oh, did I tell y'all this book is set in the 50s? Did I tell you this? It's set in the 50s. I think I decided to write about the 50s because this book is really my attempt to get to know my own mother better. And this is really her era. Okay, so here's Vernice. Mrs. McHenry explained that they were good uplift people, lifting as they climbed. They belonged to the NAACP and many other organizations that contained the word national and Negro or colored. The father held degrees from the Big Three. After Morehouse, he went to Howard and Meharry both. He signed his name Richmond McHenry, JD, MD. He named his law firm McHenry & McHenry even before his sons were born. The oldest boy turned his tassel at Morehouse, but after Meharry, he decided that being a doctor was plenty. The middle boy left the United States completely, calling himself a writer. The youngest one, Franklin, had been sickly as a child, but was blessed with the quickest mind. With his Morehouse bachelor's and his JD from North Carolina Central, he was the second McHenry on his father's shingle. With her up-to-the-moment fashion and trim figure, Mrs. McHenry was an ideal wife for a doctor-lawyer. She was attractive, but not so much that it made it seem like her husband was impractical. Her 3 kids proved that she was serious about motherhood, but she didn't have so many that you wondered if she thought she was living on a farm. When she opened her mouth, perfect words floated out. Obviously, that immaculate grammar had come from somewhere, yet she didn't flaunt her education. She invited me to her home for tea with a smile that said, "Dear, this is how it's done." Her youngest son, Franklin, came to collect me at the ornate gates at the front of the campus. A magnificent magnolia tree, known as the Sojourner, dropped a heavy cone bursting with ruby seeds. It grazed my shoulder, and I caught it as it tumbled toward the sidewalk. As I turned the spiky cone in my palm, it seemed significant. Each seed, jewel red, nested in its own nook, tethered by a delicate cord. The McHenrys lived on Veltri Circle, in enemy territory. Mrs. McHenry quipped with a trill of satisfied laughter. They were only the 3rd Negro family to purchase a home in Cascade Heights. "There are rumbles about them putting up a barricade to keep anyone else from moving in," she explained, slicing vegetables for our lunch. "Like a little piece of wall can stop the march of justice." She popped a wheel of cucumber into her mouth. "The day we arrived, you should have seen us. My sons were unimpeachable, I tell you. You could cut yourself, they were so sharp." As the movers unloaded our furniture, those white folks almost passed out. When my Chippendale couch came off that van, they knew a new day had dawned. She laughed so hard that she nearly choked. I don't know why I like that part so much. My husband says I'm obnoxious, but he loves it.
My first word was mother. That's how kin starts. And I loved the sentence because I feel that everyone in this room has a different definition of the word mother. Even the absence of mother is their definition of mother. What is your definition of mother, and what were you trying to work out as you were dealing with Vernice and Annie's interpretation of the word?
See, I think the opposite is true. I think we have all agreed on our definition of mother. We have a different experience of motherhood, but we have this agreed upon definition. So that's why when you say Annie and Vernice are motherless, we all have an agreed upon feeling of what they have lost. Now, the thing is, though, that the question really is that real live flesh and blood mothers have a hard time living up to the fantasy mother in everyone's head. So Annie's mother has abandoned her, and she spends her life trying to find her mother, but there's no way any mother can live up to the fantasy mother. And for me, I had to think about the ways that is true for all of us. Like, so in what ways are we not appreciating the mothers we have because we're comparing them to the mothers we want? And that was I think that's part for me of being a grown woman, is coming to understand my mother as a grown woman. When I started writing this, I wanted my mother to see me as a grown woman. There's a moment in the novel when, Niecy's aunt says, "Come on, we're gonna sit down and talk like 2 grown women." That was my fantasy of what my mother would want when I moved back home to Atlanta. Because when I would visit Atlanta, when I would live in New York, I would come visit her, I would always be sleeping in my childhood bedroom, right? Like, there were stuffed animals in there. And you cannot have a conversation as two grown women when one party is sleeping in the room, there's stuffed animals in there. So I moved home and I thought this is what my mother would do, but I realized that her talking to me as a grown, that was my fantasy. It was not her, that is not her fantasy relationship with me, but this book is my way of having that conversation where I come to understand her as a human being, a woman, a conflicted person, a person trying to find a way to live life with dignity.
Have you and your mom talked about the book?
My mom and I talking about nothing. My mother is not that kind of person. My mother has a PhD in economics. Like when I was a child and I would have things on my mind, I'd be so upset like somebody didn't invite me to a party. My mother would say to me, well, you do realize this is not unprecedented. So, in light of that, I will say that no, we have not gone deep about this book. I mean,
she has read it.
She read it, they read it, and she's having whatever complex thoughts she's having, but she's not talking about them to me, you see? And you have to realize nobody owes you a conversation. Like none of us owes the interior of our soul to another person, even our children.
I want everyone to think of their best friend right now, because this truly is a book about best friends. What do you think a deep friendship can fulfill in us differently than a love of a family member?
You know, your closest friends, they carry with them the archive of your life. They complete your memories. Have you ever been talking to a friend and you're remembering something and they remember part of it that you've forgotten? That means your own memory is incomplete without that person. And that's what Niecy and Annie do for each other. And people who love themselves, they want to be around the people that help them complete their memories. People who reject themselves, they don't want to be reminded of the whole story. So that's what your closest friends do. They give you the whole story. Now, the way that they're different than and you could have a person in your biological family that's like that. I do feel that when we talk about found family, we talk about found family as though it's a referendum on your biological family. Like if your biological family is not getting the job done, then you have found family. Even calling people your biological family, that means you don't like them. Think about if somebody says, yes, he is my biological father.
You don't love
Yeah, you know. So I try to think that we all, regardless of our biological situation, we all need found family because there's so much agency in found family. It is your own way of tending the emotional garden of your life. What are you going to plant in the emotional garden of your life? That is the question answered by found family.
I want to talk about writing historical fiction. I'm so excited to ask this question. I don't think I've asked an author this yet. How do you balance making sure to keep out what is happening today or something you'd say today or something that's done today in your historical fiction so that it doesn't come across as a contemporary novel but from the past? Like, do you have to, when you're on a page and you're like, ooh, would they say that back then? Would they say that today? Or did you not really overthink that too much?
I feel like it's the opposite problem, actually, is how to make sure that your preconceived ideas about that time period don't lock your characters out of their whole emotional experience. So like this is set in the 50s, but there are questions about, queer love in here. People don't associate that with the 50s, but it was happening in the 50s. And so you have to, it's like almost you have to be open to your modern emotional life against that other time period. But one of the things I had the most fun with was I had to get the Sears catalog, because they have them in the archives. And in the Sears catalog, you can see all of the things that people purchased in a time period. And what people wanted, how things were pitched at people. Did you know that you could order a whole house in the mail in the 50s?
Did not.
The whole house. It's like IKEA, but the whole house. But also I used guiding me kind of as a metaphor of the time, the wildly restrictive undergarments of the 1950s. The girdles, the long line bras, all these things, like any of us, whatever you have on right now, just think about yourself. Someone in the 1950s thinks you are naked. And I kind of use that as a metaphor for the expectations of the time, particularly for women, the mores, all that kind of sexual control. You know, in movies when the ladies used to say, I'm gonna slip into something more comfortable, she's taking all that off.
The more you know. With a book like this, it's so deep in friendship, and actually I love afterwards, I love author's notes at the end, and I love dedications. And so I want to know, who was June from Spelman class of 1953?
Dr. June McDonald Aldrich is 97 years old. When she came to Spelman College, she came from a little town in Georgia. People think of Spelman College as kind of where the Black middle class, the Black elite sent their children to be educated, but there is another part of that history. She came to Spelman with all the money everyone in her family had, and her church, all the money anyone she knew could spare fit into a stocking. She took that stocking to college, and the president poured it into a box and folded the stocking and returned it to her because she knew that child could not spare even a stocking. And she asked her, where will you live? And she said that her mother knew some people who worked for some people and she could stay on their pull-out couch. And the president said, I think you would be better served to live in a dormitory. She had never heard that word, dormitory. So every time I use the word dormitory in the book, I use it in a kind of reverential way. And so she went to Spelman, and there she had a roommate who had a sister. 1 year, the sister would work full-time as a maid, a live-in maid, so that this sister could go to school. The next year, the other sister would go and work full-time as a live-in maid so that she could go to school. And this very proud working-class history of Spelman College, I think, has been lost. That Spelman College did not merely serve a Black middle class, it created a Black middle class. So Dr. June McDonald Aldrich, who came to school with her whole community's dreams in a sock, she now has a PhD in Shakespeare.
You've been around the world for Kin on your tour. You were just in Australia. Did you learn something from other countries about your own story that maybe, I always find it fascinating when you do a world tour like this, when other countries are asking questions about a book that maybe an American wouldn't ask, but that an Australian asked that was shocking to you and that you had to answer?
You know, the thing that surprised me wasn't so much the difference, it's the things that make us the same. This question of motherhood and connection, and the line in the story that says, I was tended to, but never mothered. That is something that so many people came and spoke to me about. I was in, where was I? I was in the UK, in Brighton, and there was a woman, she was so beautifully dressed, and she told me it was her birthday, but that she had taken a train from London to tell me that this was her experience with her own mother. And, you know, she said, I have to go because it's my birthday and my family is waiting. And we all just kind of stopped everything, everyone in the room, and we just talked about this idea of what it feels like to be not fully mothered. And I felt like it was a healing moment for this lady and for others in the room. And every book I've written, I've had a moment with someone where I feel like, oh, this is the work. This person is showing me what the work is. And that has been surprising to me because I thought that what was going to resonate so much with people would be, you know, the backdrop of the American Civil Rights Movement, what does it mean, you know, how far we've come, how far we haven't, et cetera, et cetera. But the thing that has moved people and people want to talk about is this primal connection to do with motherhood.
So I read in an article that you said that your family, that racial resistance and race work were considered a shared priority and a calling. So you have written 5 novels. I'm wondering if you could sum them all up. What specifically are you trying to say in regards to that calling?
For all the books? I think the most important thing in my project is trying to capture the full range of the humanity of my characters, which is why all my books are a little bit funny even. Like Ken, I think, is a little bit funny. And my first book, Leaving Atlanta, which is about growing up in Atlanta during the Atlanta child murders. And when I was working on that book, I was at a cocktail party, and this woman, I told her I was working on a book, that 28 black children were murdered in the 1979 to 81, and 2 of those children were students at my elementary school. And the woman said to me, "Oh my goodness, you know, you must not have had a childhood." And I know what she meant, but what I felt like she was, to me, having a childhood and all the things that childhood, that the just being a young person, a growing person, a learning person, that's fundamental to being a human being. So for her to say I didn't have a childhood, I felt like she was saying, are you even human? And so part of my work is capturing the whole of the experience of my characters. And I'll give you, I have to give you a little story. When I was a child, during the child murders, I remember this. When I was like 10 years old, and I had decided that I should wear a bra. I decided I should wear a bra. Other people were wearing bras. I too should wear a bra. And no one seemed to think much of this idea, and the reasons were obvious, but I wanted one. And so finally, Mommy took me to JCPenney, and the late JCPenney lady with her measuring tape, she deduced that I should wear a size 28 AAA. That is no bra. That's the opposite of a bra. That's half of a tank top. And so, and my mama and the bra lady were kind of chuckling. I didn't appreciate it, as you could imagine. And I remember I was so mad. And so I had written about that part of that story once. But then the other half of the story is that with me being mad, I flounced away. But back in the 80s, remember they used to sell TVs in department stores, and all the TVs would be on? And when I was mad, stomping off from the bra section, because I felt like I was being mocked by the people who were better endowed, all the TVs, I looked and I saw a child that I knew from my class, and they were saying, this child is missing in Atlanta. If you have any information regarding the disappearance of Rodney Green, please call this number. And for me, both of those things were my childhood, right? Like my experience with the bra people, that was my childhood, but also losing my friend, that was my childhood. And I don't think that leaving out the funny part undermines the gravity of the other part. It's what makes it more human. And I also feel that if someone is reading my book and they have an experience similar to the experience about which I'm writing, and they leave my book more distressed than they came to my book, that is the opposite of the work.
You are the Charles Howard Candler Professor of Creating Writing at Emory University, and I'm wondering if you can take us into your classroom. What are some writing tips in your syllabus? What books would you have your students study as great examples of literature?
Well, one of the main things, we do workshop-style class, and my main job is to teach them actually to be better editors of their own work by reading other people's work, and also to be compassionate members of a writing community. Every class, my goal is for them to leave excited to write another draft. If that person leaves and we've told them every little thing wrong with their story and they are crestfallen and they abandon the draft, then we have put fewer stories into the world. And I keep using this word, but that too is the opposite of the work. The work is to bring more stories into the world. So I try to keep them enthusiastic and energetic. Sometimes we do things like we'll read whatever short story is in the New Yorker that week. Sometimes we just do that for kicks because it keeps us on our toes because we don't know what's coming, and it makes us, very up to the minute. Also, when I go to cocktail parties, I like to talk about what's in the New Yorker. So I do that to stay up to date. We also, what else do we do in class? We always have to read a Morrison novel every time. Song of Solomon, that's our favorite. By our, I mean me.
And you're the boss.
I'm a benevolent boss. I love my students. They keep me idealistic. Like, there was a time when I was told my writing career was over. I was told that I should start writing under a pseudonym, that I should pretend to be a new person and start over. Isn't that terrible?
Who was that?
Everybody. That was the idea. They were saying that, do you remember when BookScan, that's the app, it's an app that tells you how many books you've sold. Before BookScan, you could act successful and people would think you were successful. But once BookScan came, you could act however you wanted. They could just do this thing on their phones and make your contribution into a number. And so my BookScan numbers were terrible. And so I could not get a contract for my third novel. Everyone was just like, no, no, no. So they said I should become another person. And when I teach, I tell my students, you write the story your spirit tells you to write. So how could I abandon a book that was so close and personal to me because of an app and face those kids every day? So I just finished the book, even though I was told it would never be published. I wrote it on Martha's Vineyard, actually. And I printed it out, and I thought that was the end of it. But I had done my part, which meant I could face my students. Well, I was invited to Florida for a book festival, and I didn't want to go because I was embarrassed because I didn't have a book contract and everybody there was so famous, and then it turned out my books were out of print, so I had no books to even prove that I was a writer. But I didn't want to turn it down because I had already agreed to go, and I was raised to be a nice girl. So I went to Florida. I was so heartbroken because I wouldn't even have books to sign, and I did my little reading, and there was a little stack of books for me to sign, and I asked the bookstore, oh, where did you get these? And the bookstore lady said, oh, they came in this box. I looked at the box. It had my daddy's handwriting on it. I said, Daddy, what did you do? He said, well, I was thinking about it. We had some books around the house. He said, and then, your uncle, he bought some books. He didn't read those books. Those books are not used. Your uncle did not use them, so don't let them discount it. That is a new book. I promise you, your uncle didn't even open it. He said, so you just sign those books, and then if anyone else comes out, you say, oh my goodness, I'm popular. It looks like I've sold out. So I said, oh, okay. So I signed my little 7 books, and a lady came and she said she wanted to buy a book. And I said, oh my goodness, I guess I've sold out. I'm popular. And she said, that's so strange because I've heard that you can't get a contract. I've heard that your books are out of print. I heard that they want you to get a new name. And I was so embarrassed that this lady knew. And she said, but come with me, I can help you. And I wasn't sure if I should go because, you meet some strange people on the book tour. But I said, yes, ma'am. And she took me by the hand and she carried me through the crowd. And she put my hand in the hand of an editor. And I knew this editor because they had already rejected me because of the BookScan. So I was so embarrassed that I was about to get rejected. So I was trying to be polite. I told her what the book was about. I was like, oh, it's about 2 girls. They have the same dad, but the dad is a bigamist. It's complicated. And she said, oh, that sounds fascinating. I'd love to read it. And I was thinking, you already rejected this. But I said, okay. And she said, well, I can see you're trying to leave, but before you go, tell me, how do you and Judy know each other? I said, oh, I don't know Judy. She said, no, I mean Judy Bloom, who just introduced us. It was like my nerdy childhood had rescued me.
Okay, a quick speed round, and then we can take a couple audience questions. So your favorite book as a child?
Charlotte's Web, Some Pig, Terrific, Radiant, Humble.
That is the book of this festival. I feel like it's been brought up.
It's the best book ever.
Cheers to Charlotte's Web. Favorite fictional best friends?
Ooh, I'm gonna say Sula and Nell.
Favorite fictional mother?
Have you noticed they don't have very many good mothers in fiction?
I think I have, yeah.
Yeah, I know, because people ask me this. I try to come up with an honest answer, and I really can't think of a fictional mother.
Well, a lot of them are dead. I feel like all Disney princesses don't have a mother.
And evil stepmothers exist because, it's almost like mothers are put in stories as obstacles.
Favorite moment on your book tour? Other than this, of course.
Oh, my favorite moment of my book tour is when, I'm going to say when, I know you all are going to think I have Arrested Development because this also goes back to my childhood, but when I was a kid, my teacher left mid-year and I was so hurt and I never saw her again. And she came to my book signing and I would recognize her anywhere. She looks the same. And I said, Mrs. Elmore. And she said, the last time I saw you, you were crying because it brought tears to my eyes. And she said, and when you were little, when I told you I was leaving your school, you said, are you sure this is necessary? And she says in her family, they say that all the time. Are you sure this is necessary?
Okay, what's your favorite book of 2026 so far?
My favorite book of 2026 so far is called How to Commit a Post-Colonial Murder. It's so good. I don't understand why everybody isn't reading it.
Who's it by?
Nina McConaughey.
Okay.
It's so good.
Write it down, people. Okay, audience questions. I think we have time for like 2 or 3. In the back there, Liz?
When you're writing with 2 characters going back and forth, so Vernice and Annie, and how do you manage that?
Well, actually, when I first wrote it, I wrote about 100 pages of Vernice, 100 pages of Annie, 100 pages of Baby Doll, 50 pages of Baby Doll, 50 pages of Joette. And I decided that it wasn't working, so I took the Annie and Niecy parts and tore them into smaller, like digestible chunks. But here's the thing, every chapter has a beginning, middle, and end. So I had to take these pieces and like chapterize them and make them shapely. And it made the other characters kind of pop out more. But, you know, when I first wrote it, this isn't what you asked me, but I had killed the wrong person. And I came to understand that when I tore the pieces apart. I know I resurrected somebody.
Okay, one more. Wait, you can wait for the mic. Thank you.
It's such an honor and a delight to listen to you. Thank you. As a former high school English teacher, I have to ask you, would you consider Pilate as a model mom in Song of Solomon? I know she's flawed, but think of...
And also, look how her kids turned out, though.
I know, but...
I mean, that was a mess.
Yeah, but think of her fight for Hagar, think of her defense of Reba, and think of how if I'd have known more people, I would have loved them. I mean, I think she was a different kind of mom.
I think she was an interesting person, but would you want that to be your mama?
No, but anyway, I just
but I do think, and also, you know, she doesn't come to mind because, and that's another thing, like when you say who's your favorite mother in literature,
Yeah.
It's usually a character that is in the story to be a mother.
Right.
And she's doing so many other things that I had not really thought of her as. She seems almost like a person who happens to be a mother.
Yeah.
But no, she can't be. No, there was a mess over there.
Okay, one more. Anyone?
I loved every word of Kin, start to finish, but I specifically loved the epistolary part where they were writing letters to each other. I just felt like we got inside a different part of their relationship, and I was just wondering what made you decide to include those. Did you always know you wanted that? Did you feel like something was missing? You were trying to add something different?
Well, I enjoy letter writing in my real life. I think that the care and time it takes for a letter makes for a certain, like this disposable correspondence that we do, like with text, you just dash them off, you don't care, it's instant, it doesn't cost you anything. But a letter takes time, and so I feel like what you write in a letter has a little more weight. My grandfather courted my grandmother via letter. He lived 8 miles from her, no one had a car, so every 2 weeks he would walk 8 miles, sit like this, because you know, back then people were very supervisory, right? So he would just sit and look at her in the living room and walk back home and get home and write her a hot letter. He had beautiful handwriting, and he wrote one letter that said, "I have crossed the river of love and burned the bridge behind me." Yes, Granddaddy. And so I also wanted to kind of, you know, give a certain amount of acknowledgement and loving remembrance to the intensity of letters.
This has been such a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you.